Have you ever experienced a miracle? Jesus performed them while on earth, but do they still happen today? Best-selling author Lee Strobel joins us now to talk about The Case for Miracles. It's his latest book on the subject. I'm holding a copy of it. The Case for Miracles, a journalist investigates evidence for the supernatural. Welcome, Lee. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, to talk about this. Well, first of all, you are a former atheist,
Right.
those who are not familiar with your story.
Yeah.
And you set out many years ago to disprove the existence of Christ,
Yeah.
and ended up becoming a believer. Would you consider that a miracle?
I do. I consider conversion, redemption to be miraculous in and of itself. But, interestingly, it was the evidence for the miracle of the resurrection that convinced me that Jesus really is who he claimed to be. So I spent 2 years investigating the historical data for the resurrection of Jesus, and became convinced based on the evidence of history that he really did claim to be the Son of God, and then backed it up by returning from the dead. So that miracle is what brought me to faith. But like you, trained in journalism, and I have a law degree, I tend to be a skeptic. And so I said, okay, I believe in the miracle of the resurrection. I believe in the miracle of creation. I believe Jesus did miracles because they're well documented, but does God still do miracles today? Really? Does he really? And that's what launched me on this investigation that resulted in The Case for Miracles.
All right. Well, in your new book, The Case for Miracles, what is your approach? Kind of take us through it.
Yeah, I take a different approach than people would imagine. I start out by interviewing the biggest skeptic in America, the editor of Skeptic magazine, Dr.
Wow.
Michael Shermer. And I challenged him. I said, build the strongest case you can against miracles. And I give him 3 chapters at the beginning of the book to build his case against miracles. I said, I'm not afraid to hear from skeptics. And then the rest of the book responds to those objections he raises and then builds the affirmative case. So we don't have to be afraid of people that claim, oh, no, miracles, only dumb people believe in those, or so forth. There's actually good evidence, good documented scientific evidence as well as medical evidence that points toward the reality that God is still in the miracle business today.
Awesome. Well, here at CBN, we've told many stories of
Yeah.
miracles through the years, like someone living after given hardly any chance of survival. That's
Right.
one example. Do those moments count as miracles?
Absolutely. In fact, I didn't realize at the time, but I tell the story in my book about a guy who I guess you guys had done a piece on earlier, who was literally declared dead. The blood, his hands and feet were turning black because his blood was pooling. He's declared dead. The doctor walks out of the room and hears the voice of God saying, try one more time. This is ridiculous. Try one more time. He goes back in, prays, revives him. No brain damage, despite the fact he hadn't been breathing for over 45 minutes. And I think that is a divine intervention. And where I think we can think a miracle happens when there's this outside validation. In other words, how do you account for that voice of God telling the doctor to go back and try one more time? Is that a coincidence? I mean, there's something on the outside that plays a role in the miracle. That tends to give it credibility to me. When we have credible eyewitnesses, when we have good medical documentation, we have witnesses who have no reason to deceive or lie, there's a spiritual context of prayer, and then something absolutely extraordinary takes place, as I document in the book, I think we can reasonably conclude God's doing a miracle.
Where do you think most people stand when it comes to believing in miracles?
Well, I did a scientific survey. I hired a public opinion polling firm to study those kind of issues. And I found that only 15% of Americans believe that miracles can't happen today. Most Americans, by far, 67%, say miracles can't happen today. But here's the most interesting statistic I found. 38% of American adults say they personally have had an instance in their life that they can only explain as being a miracle of God. So now if you extrapolate that, that means there would be 94 million miracles in America. Now, let's say, pick a number, 99% of those are they're wrong. Let's say it's just a huge coincidence. That still would leave 1 million miracles taking place. I think miracles are more common than we think, and I think many of them are far better documented medically and scientifically and with eyewitnesses than we tend to think as well.
Well, there are times when it seems as if a prayer for a miracle isn't answered.
Yeah.
Let's say God cured someone's cancer in some situations. Some people might say, why doesn't he do it all the time? What's your response to that?
I could not write a book on miracles without dealing with that issue. Mm-hmm. My wife has been in chronic pain for 20 years. Every day of her life, she's in pain. There is no medical hope that she will ever recover. She will be in pain the rest of her life. We've prayed for a miracle. It has not happened. So this is personal for me and for her. And so I went to a man who is a PhD in philosophy, who knows the head stuff, the knowledge stuff about this, but whose own wife is dying of a brain disease at a premature age. And so he has the emotional connection with this issue as well. It is the most profound interview I've ever conducted. The wisdom that flows from him is so life-changing and helped me and Leslie, my wife, in our situation. I think it'll help anybody that reads that interview. But I think a couple of quick things. Number one, God is sovereign. He can do as he will do. His ways are above our ways. We don't understand. We don't see the big picture like he does. Romans 8:28, which says God will cause good to emerge from suffering in our life. You know what? We use it as a cliche, but it's true. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, in Jesus' day, miracles weren't automatic. Matthew says that Jesus didn't do many miracles in Nazareth. Paul was never healed of the thorn in his flesh, and he actually left behind Trophimus, who was sick when Paul was traveling. And then in Matthew chapter 10, the disciples are given the authority to heal, and yet 7 chapters later, they're unable to heal an epileptic boy. So healings were not automatic in Jesus' day either, and they're not automatic today. But we're told to pray. I mean, James tells us to anoint people with oil, to pray for their recovery. And I think a lot of churches shy away from that because they're afraid, well, what if they don't get healed? Then we'll be embarrassed. I think we have to be faithful to what God calls us to do. And he does things. I've talked to people whose healings have been extraordinary and well documented. And I say, why you? Why you and not my wife? I say, I don't know. There's no magic formula. God, for whatever reason, chose to do something miraculous in my life. So we'll find out someday in heaven. And also, you know, for all that follow Jesus, there will ultimately be healing as we leave this world. And my wife looks forward to that when there'll be a day with no pain and no suffering.
That's right. No pain in heaven. That's for sure. Well, what do you hope that God accomplishes through this book?
I hope that people will find their faith deepened, that God would be more real to them. Sheila Walsh, who you may know, the Christian singer and TV host, she said, you know, if your faith was deepened when you read The Case for Christ, you will fall on your knees and worship as you read The Case for Miracles, because it causes us to just express great wonder and joy and worship of God, who is a loving and powerful and healing God. So that's my hope, that people will walk away encouraged in their faith, but also to feel confident to give it away to a skeptic, give it away, because I deal with the skeptical issues. I give them full credit, and I acknowledge that many of their arguments are correct, and that many cases of healing are not real cases, and I concede that, but it doesn't explain everything. And so it's a book you can confidently give to a son or a daughter who's kind of spiritually curious or wandering, or a friend or whatever. And my hope is God will use it to point them toward the reality of who he is.
Well, this book is definitely needed in this day and age. That is for sure, when there are so many voices that are anti-God out there. Yeah. So I commend you for your efforts and yielding to God in this. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. It's been a joy.
All right. Apologist Lee Strobel, also the author of, once again, The Case for Miracles. A journalist investigates evidence for the supernatural. And I'm sure people can find it at bookstores all over, Amazon, you name it.
Yeah, or caseformiracles.com.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Lee. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.